Sometimes the hardest thing about getting older isn't the aching joints or the gray hair. It's waking up one morning and realizing the life you built doesn't need you anymore. That's what happened to Rae Dunning at 62 when her last child moved overseas. She found an old map in her father's Bible and walked into the Montana wilderness alone. The map led her to a falling-down cabin with a name carved over the door, E. Dunning, 1926. Nobody in her family ever talked about it. As Rae starts fixing up the cabin, she finds signs that someone disappeared here long ago. The locals say she's losing her mind. But what was her father hiding, and why did he leave her this map? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The house in Spokane had been too quiet for months, but Rae Dunning only truly felt it the morning after Thanksgiving. Her youngest, Michael, had flown back to Singapore, where he taught English at an international school. The airport goodbye had been brief. He was running late, distracted by work emails, promising to call soon but already mentally gone. She'd driven home in silence, pulled into the driveway of the tidy craftsman she and Dennis had bought 33 years ago, and sat in the car for 20 minutes before going inside. The house smelled like yesterday's turkey. Rae walked through rooms that suddenly felt too large, too clean, too perfectly arranged. Dennis had been gone 5 years now, taken by a heart attack while mowing the lawn on a Sunday afternoon. She'd adjusted to his absence the way you adjust to losing a limb. Never quite right, but you learn to function. But this emptiness was different. This was the silence of a life that had completed its purpose. She was 62 years old. She'd spent 30 years as a pediatric nurse at Sacred Heart Hospital, retired 3 years ago, with a pension and a gold-plated stethoscope she kept in a drawer. She'd raised 3 children who were now scattered across the world. James was in Boston with his wife and 2 daughters Rae saw once a year, if she was lucky. Sarah lived in Portland, consumed by her career in tech, calling every other Sunday out of obligation. And Michael, her baby, was 9 time zones away, living a life she couldn't imagine. The retirement she'd planned, the one where she'd babysit grandchildren and take watercolor classes and maybe finally travel to places Dennis had always promised that retirement belonged to someone else. Her grandchildren had their other grandmother, the one who lived 3 blocks away and didn't require a cross-country flight. The watercolor classes felt silly when she tried them, and traveling alone seemed less like adventure and more like an admission of loneliness. Rae spent her days in a routine that felt like slow suffocation. Coffee at 6. Morning walk around the neighborhood, smiling at familiar faces who had their own lives. Grocery shopping on Tuesdays. Book club on Thursdays, where they discussed novels she barely remembered reading. Doctor appointments that were becoming more frequent as her body catalogued small failures. Blood pressure, cholesterol, the beginning whispers of arthritis in her hands. She called her children weekly. The conversations followed scripts. How are you, Mom? Oh, fine. Keeping busy. How are the girls? Good, good. Soccer season is crazy. That's wonderful. Tell them Grandma loves them. Will do. Listen, I've got to run. And that was connection in the modern age. 6 months ago, her father had died. Walter Dunning, 93 years old, had simply gone to sleep one night in the assisted living facility and not woken up. The doctor said it was peaceful. Rae wondered if peace was just another word for giving up. She and her siblings, older brother Robert and younger sister Linda, had divided the estate with efficient indifference. Their father had never been warm, never shared much about his past. He'd worked as a civil engineer, provided for his family, and kept his interior life locked away like documents in a safety deposit box. When he was gone, he left behind a tidy apartment, some savings split 3 ways, and boxes of papers no one wanted to sort through. Robert took the war medals and the pocket watch. Linda took the photo albums, though she'd probably never look at them. Rae took the books and personal effects, mostly out of duty. For weeks, the boxes sat in her garage. One more task she couldn't muster energy to complete. Then one rainy afternoon in October, with nothing else to occupy her hands, Rae finally opened them. Most of it was mundane, old bills, tax returns, warranties for appliances long discarded. But in the bottom of the third box, wrapped in a canvas cloth, she found her father's army Bible. She recognized it from childhood. He'd kept it on his nightstand, occasionally read from it on Sunday mornings, but never with particular fervor. It was more heirloom than scripture. Rae sat on the garage floor and opened it. The leather cover was soft with age, the pages thin as onion skin. Walter Dunning, 1943, was inscribed on the inside cover in faded ink. He would have been 22 then, drafted into the war that shaped his generation. She flipped through carefully. Pressed flowers fell out from psalms, dried wildflowers she didn't recognize. In the margins were notes in two different handwritings. Her father's blocky print she knew, but there was another, elegant, flowing script that had to be older from before his time. Tucked between Ecclesiastes and Song of Solomon, she found a photograph. Black and white, edges scalloped the way they were in old pictures. A young woman stood in front of a rough wooden cabin. She wore men's work clothes, canvas pants, a heavy shirt, boots. Her hair was pulled back severely, and she wasn't smiling, but there was something fierce in her eyes, something uncompromising. On the back, in the same elegant script from the margins, Estelle, summer 1926. Rae stared at the photograph. She didn't recognize the woman. Her father's mother, her grandmother, had died in childbirth, or so the family story went. She'd never seen a picture of her, never heard her name spoken. The dates made sense. Her father born in 1927, this photo from 1926. But the woman in this picture didn't look like someone who was dying. She looked like someone who was ferociously alive. Behind the photograph was a folded paper, brittle with age. Rae unfolded it carefully. It was a hand-drawn map, the ink faded to brown but still legible. Topographical lines marked elevation changes. A creek was labeled in tiny letters, Snowmelt Creek. Trees were indicated with small symbols. And in the center, marked with an X, was a square with words above it, Home, ED, at the bottom of the map. Coordinates were written in her father's handwriting, along with a single line, When you're ready. Rae sat in the garage as rain drummed on the roof. She looked at the photograph again, at the cabin, at the woman named Estelle, with her father's initial, E. Dunning. Her grandmother, somehow not dead in childbirth but alive in 1926, in some mountain wilderness. The rational part of her brain offered explanations. Maybe this was before she got sick. Maybe the family story was wrong about timing. Maybe this was someone else entirely, but the map with her father's note, When you're ready, that felt intentional, like he'd left it for someone to find, like he'd left it for her. Over the next 2 weeks, Rae couldn't let it go. She researched the coordinates. They pointed to a remote area in the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana, about 4 hours from Spokane. National forest land, mostly, with a few private parcels grandfathered in from homesteading days. She found references to old cabins used by trappers and prospectors in the 1920s, most long abandoned. She told no one. Not her siblings, who'd think she was being sentimental over an old photograph. Not her children, who'd worry. Not the friends at book club, who'd ask too many questions she couldn't answer. Instead, she went to REI and bought supplies. A good backpack. A sleeping bag rated for cold weather. A water filter, a first aid kit, a headlamp. The young salesman asked about her plans, and she said something vague about day hikes. He looked doubtful at her age, but took her money. She studied the map every night, comparing it to modern topographical maps and satellite images. She found the creek, traced what she thought was the route marked in faded ink. The cabin, if it still existed, would be about 6 miles from the nearest Forest Service road, accessible only on foot. On a Wednesday morning in early November, Rae loaded her car. She left a note on the kitchen counter that said she was taking a trip, would call soon, not to worry. She knew it would cause worry, knew her children would be annoyed at her vagueness. She didn't care. The drive took her through Spokane's industrial outskirts, then into the rolling wheat fields of eastern Washington, and finally into the mountains. The highway climbed through pine forests, already dusted with early snow. She stopped once for coffee and gas, eating a sandwich in the car while studying the map again. The trailhead was unmarked, just a widening in the shoulder where the Forest Service road ended. Rae parked, shouldered her pack, heavier than she'd expected, and checked the compass on her phone. Southeast, 6 miles. The hike was harder than she'd anticipated. Her body was reasonably fit for 62. She walked daily, did yoga twice a week. But carrying 30 pounds over uneven terrain was different. Her knees complained, her shoulders ached. But she kept moving, following the landmarks from the map. Snowmelt Creek appeared after 2 miles, running clear and cold over smooth stones. She refilled her water bottle, checked her bearings, and continued upstream. The forest was dense here, old growth. Douglas fir and lodgepole pine. The silence was profound, broken only by her breathing and the occasional bird call. After 4 hours, she found it. The cabin sat in a small clearing where the creek bent around a rocky outcrop. It was small, maybe 12 feet by 15, built from weathered logs that had turned silver-gray with age. The roof sagged in the middle, and one corner had partially collapsed. The single window was broken, the door hung crooked on its hinges, but above the door, carved into a log and still readable after almost a century, were the words E. Dunning, 1926. Rae dropped her pack and walked forward slowly, like approaching something sacred. She reached up and traced the letters with her fingers. The wood was rough, the carving deep. Someone had made this with care, with intention, a claim, a declaration. She pushed the door open carefully. It scraped across the floor, which was littered with pine needles and small animal droppings. The interior was dim, lit only by the broken window and the open door. One room, a stone fireplace on the far wall, its chimney intact. The remains of a wooden bed frame in one corner. A small table collapsed, shelves that had mostly fallen. Evidence of mice and squirrels and time's patient destruction, but it was still standing. After 99 years, it was still here. Rae set down her pack and did a slow circuit of the space. In her mind, she could see it as it must have been, simple but functional, everything handmade, a life stripped to essentials. She thought of the woman in the photograph, fierce-eyed Estelle, choosing this solitude. That night, Rae spread her sleeping bag on the cleanest patch of floor and lay down exhausted. Through the broken window, she could see stars, more than she'd ever seen in the city. She thought about her father, about what he must have known and never said. She thought about the life she'd left behind in Spokane, the empty house, the hollow routine. And she thought about the woman who'd carved her name above this door and declared this place home. As she drifted towards sleep, Rae whispered to the darkness, "This is my sanctuary now." The words felt right. They felt true. And for the first time in months, maybe years, Rae Dunning felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The first week passed in a blur of physical work that felt more purposeful than anything Rae had done in years. She cleared the cabin of debris, sweeping out decades of accumulated pine needles and dust. She patched the broken window with plastic sheeting and duct tape. She tested the fireplace, finding the chimney still drew properly, and spent her first cold night with actual heat. Her body ached constantly. Muscles she'd forgotten she had made themselves known, but it was good pain, earned pain. Each evening she ate simple meals, heated over a camp stove, and fell asleep the moment her head touched the makeshift pillow. No television, no phone service, no distractions. Just work and rest and the sound of the creek running past. On the 8th day, while sweeping the floor more thoroughly, Rae noticed something odd. One of the floorboards near the fireplace sounded hollow when she walked across it. She knelt down and examined it closely. The board was slightly shorter than the others, its edges worn smooth, as if from repeated removal. She worked her fingers into the gap and lifted. The board came up easily, revealing a space beneath. And in that space, wrapped in oilcloth, was a book. Rae lifted it out carefully. The oilcloth was brittle, but had done its job. The book inside was dry. It was a journal, leather-bound, about the size of a modern paperback. The leather was cracked with age, but intact. She opened it to the first page. The elegant script she recognized from the Bible margins filled the page. My name is Rae Dunning. I'm 22 years old. Today, I have claimed this cabin as my own, and I will not be moved from it. Let this record stand as testament to my choice and my freedom. Rae's hands trembled. She sat down heavily, her back against the wall, and continued reading. The entries began in March 1926. Estelle wrote about fleeing Seattle, about the man her father had promised her to, a banker twice her age named Horace Whitfield. The wedding was planned for April. Instead, in the middle of the night, Estelle had packed a rucksack, taken money she'd been secretly saving from her work as a school teacher, and bought a train ticket east. She wrote about finding the homestead cabin abandoned, about deciding to stay, about learning to fish in the creek, to identify edible plants, to build proper fires. The writing was matter-of-fact, but occasionally revealed flashes of fear and doubt. I do not know if I can survive a winter here, but I know I cannot survive the life that was planned for me. I would rather die free in these mountains than live as property in Seattle. Then in May, the entries changed. A man had found her, a trapper named Thomas. Rae's heart quickened as she read Estelle's descriptions. Thomas Kerrigan was older, she wrote, maybe 40, weathered by years in the wilderness. He'd been checking his trap lines when he saw smoke from her fire. He could have reported her, could have forced her back. Instead, he offered to teach her. The entries through that summer detailed Thomas's lessons. How to set snares for rabbits, how to smoke meat for preservation, which mushrooms were safe, which would kill you, how to read weather in the sky and animal behavior, where to find medicinal plants, how to prepare a cabin for winter. And between the practical lessons, something else emerged, carefully worded, never stated outright, but clear enough. Estelle was falling in love with her teacher. In August, the entries became sporadic and brief. Then in September, a single line, I am with child. Thomas has asked me to marry him. I have refused. Rae stopped reading, stunned. She flipped forward, looking for explanation. He does not understand. I did not flee one binding to accept another, even one offered with love. I told him I will raise this child alone. He was hurt and angry. He left and did not return for 3 weeks. When he did, he brought supplies for the winter and said nothing of marriage again. We have reached an understanding. The next entries detailed pregnancy in the wilderness. Estelle documented her changing body with clinical precision, her fears about giving birth alone, her determination to survive. Thomas visited weekly, bringing food and supplies, checking on her welfare. Their relationship was cordial but strained. Then, in April 1927, a son, born during the snowmelt, healthy and loud. Thomas was here, thank God. I would not have survived it without him. He held my hand and told me to breathe, and when it was over, he wept. We have named him Walter, after my grandfather. Thomas still asks me to marry him. I still refuse. But I am no longer certain of my reasons. Rae pressed her hand to her mouth. Her father, born in this cabin, in this very room, delivered by a trapper named Thomas Kerrigan. She read on hungrily. The entries over the next months described the challenges of caring for an infant in the wilderness. Estelle's exhaustion. Her fierce love for her son. Thomas's devotion, not just to Estelle but to the baby. He became a constant presence, helping, providing, gradually becoming part of their small family. But then, in the summer of 1927, the entries became troubled. I cannot give Walter the life he deserves. No education, no society, no future beyond these mountains. Thomas says it doesn't matter, that the boy will be free and strong. But I was a teacher. I know what he will lack. More entries followed, each more anguished. Estelle was torn between her own need for freedom and her son's needs. She wrote about her sister Margaret in Seattle, married now with a good home, about long letters exchanged, about a proposal that tore at her heart. The final clear entry was dated October 1927. It is decided. Margaret and her husband will raise Walter. He will go to school, have opportunities, live in the world. I will visit when I can, and he will come here in summers when he is old enough to understand. I'm not abandoning him. I'm giving him a chance I cannot provide. Thomas says I am wrong, that I'm choosing my freedom over my child. Perhaps he is right. Perhaps I'm a monster. But I will not doom Walter to my exile. After that, the entries became water-damaged, the ink bleeding across pages until they were illegible. Rae tried to make out words, but could only catch fragments. Summer visits, my son, the years passing, Thomas. She closed the journal and sat in the dim cabin as the afternoon light faded. Her entire understanding of her family had just collapsed. Her father had not been abandoned. He'd been protected, given away out of love, raised by his aunt while his mother lived here in chosen solitude, and her father had known. He must have visited, must have come to these mountains summer after summer. The photographs she'd found made sense now. He'd documented his mother's life, kept the secret, protected her choice for decades. Rae felt dizzy with revelation. She thought of her father's silence, his emotional distance. Had it been pain? Had he resented Estelle's choice? Or had he understood it in a way the world never would? As darkness settled, Rae lit a fire in the fireplace and made tea on her camp stove. She sat wrapped in her sleeping bag, rereading passages from the journal. She wanted to know more. What happened to Estelle? How long she lived? What became of Thomas? The damaged pages held secrets she couldn't access. Outside, the wind picked up, moving through the pines with a sound like breathing. And then Rae heard something else, footsteps on the porch. She froze, listening. Slow, deliberate steps. Not the scrabble of an animal, but the measured tread of someone, walking. The steps stopped at the door. Rae's heart hammered. She reached for the flashlight, her hand shaking. The door was closed, but not locked. She watched the handle, waiting for it to turn. Nothing happened. The wind continued. The creek burbled in the darkness. But the presence outside remained. She could feel it. Some pressure against the door, some attention focused on the cabin. She found her voice. "Hello, who's there?" No answer, just the wind. Rae stood slowly, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. She moved to the door, pressed her ear against it. Nothing. She waited 5 minutes that felt like hours. Finally, she pulled the door open quickly, flashlight raised. The porch was empty. The clearing was empty. But in the beam of her light, she saw something that made her breath catch. Fresh wildflowers lay on the porch boards, arranged carefully in a small bundle. Mountain asters, their purple petals vivid against the weathered wood. No one had been there when she arrived that evening. She was certain of it. And no one could have come and gone so silently. Rae picked up the flowers with trembling hands. They were real, fresh-picked, still damp with dew. She looked out at the dark forest, at the spaces between the trees where shadows moved with the wind. "Estelle," she whispered. The forest gave no answer. But Rae stood there for a long time, holding the flowers, feeling watched by something she couldn't name and wasn't sure she wanted to see. Rae didn't sleep much that night. She kept the fire burning and the flashlight within reach, listening to every sound. The cabin creaked and settled. Things moved in the darkness outside. Animals, she told herself, just animals. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw those carefully arranged flowers and felt the presence that had stood outside her door. By morning, exhaustion and daylight brought back rationality. Someone had left the flowers, that was fact. But it didn't have to be supernatural. There could be other people in these mountains. Hikers, hunters, locals who knew about the old cabin. Maybe even someone who'd known Estelle, though that seemed unlikely after so many years. Rae made coffee and ate oatmeal, then decided to explore the cabin more thoroughly. If there were answers to be found, they'd be here. She started with the crawl space. The cabin was built on a stone foundation that raised it about 2 feet off the ground. She'd noticed the access panel on the exterior the first day, but hadn't investigated. Now, armed with her flashlight and a stick to check for animals, she pried open the wooden cover. The space beneath was dry, protected from weather by the cabin's overhang. Rae shone her light across dirt and stone. At first she saw nothing but cobwebs and the white bones of some small creature. Then pushed far back against the foundation, she spotted a bundle wrapped in canvas. She had to crawl halfway under the cabin to reach it. Dirt pressing against her chest, the smell of earth thick in her nose. Her fingers closed around the bundle, and she dragged it back into daylight. The canvas was rotted in places, but still held together. Inside were tools, steel traps, their jaws showing rust but still functional, and several knives with worn wooden handles. Trapping tools, she realized. Old but well made, the kind that would last generations. On each handle, carved into the wood, were the initials T.K. Thomas Kerrigan. The trapper who'd taught Estelle, who'd loved her, who'd been part of this story. These were his tools, stored carefully beneath the cabin. Why? Had he left them here intentionally, or had Estelle kept them after he was gone? Rae cleaned the tools carefully, marveling at their craftsmanship. The traps were serious equipment, heavy steel with powerful springs. The knives were sharp, despite their age, their blades marked with maker's marks she didn't recognize. These weren't sporting goods. These were the tools of someone who'd lived off the land for real, for whom trapping was survival, not hobby. She wondered what had happened to Thomas. The journal had mentioned him through 1927, but then the damaged pages had made the story unclear. Had he stayed in Estelle's life? Had their relationship remained platonic? Or had it eventually become something more? Rae decided to make a supply run. She'd been at the cabin for 9 days now, and her food was running low. More importantly, she wanted to know if anyone in the nearest town remembered the Dunning cabin or its occupant. The hike out was easier than the hike in had been. Her body was adapting, and she knew the route now. She reached her car by early afternoon and drove to the closest town marked on her map, Thornhill. It was tiny, maybe 3 blocks of weathered buildings along a 2-lane highway. A general store, a gas station, a diner, and not much else. The kind of place that existed because it had always existed, where everyone knew everyone, and strangers were marked immediately. Rae parked at the general store and went inside. The interior was dim and crowded with merchandise, fishing tackle, canned goods, work clothes, basic hardware. An older man stood behind the counter reading a hunting magazine. "Help you?" he asked, barely looking up. "Just need some supplies," Rae said. "Staying up in the mountains for a bit." That got his attention. He looked at her more carefully, taking in her age, her worn hiking clothes. "You camping?" "In a way. I'm staying at an old cabin. The Dunning place." The change in his expression was immediate. His eyes widened slightly and he set down his magazine. "The Dunning cabin? Up on Snowmelt Creek." "That's the one." He stared at her. "Ma'am, you shouldn't be up there." "Why not?" Before he could answer, the door opened and another man walked in, elderly, maybe 80, with a weathered face and sharp blue eyes. He caught the tail end of the conversation. "She say the Dunning cabin?" the old man asked. The clerk nodded. "Was just telling her you shouldn't be there," the old man interrupted. He walked closer to Rae, studying her. "You're not from around here." "Spokane," Rae said. "But I have family connection to the cabin. My grandmother, Estelle Dunning," the old man said flatly. "You're kin to her?" Rae felt a chill. "You knew her?" "Knew of her? Everyone did back in the day. My name's Vernon Haskell. I've lived in these mountains 78 years." He paused. "Estelle Dunning was a legend around here. Not the good kind." "What do you mean?" Vernon exchanged a glance with the clerk, then sighed. "Might as well sit down. This ain't a short story." They moved to a bench near the front window. Vernon settled himself slowly, his joints clearly bothering him. "Estelle Dunning came to these mountains in 1926. Young woman, alone, which was strange enough back then. She took over that old homestead cabin and refused to leave. Folks tried to help her at first. Women from town would hike up, bring food, try to convince her to come back to civilization. She thanked them politely and sent them away." "That doesn't sound so terrible," Rae said. "Let me finish." "She had a baby up there." "No husband, no doctor, just her and that trapper fellow, Thomas Kerrigan. Folks were scandalized. Then she gave the baby away, sent it to live with family in the city. That made things worse. Women who'd been sympathetic turned against her. What kind of mother gives up her child to live alone in the woods?" Vernon's face was troubled. Stories started going around. People said she'd gone mad. They said she talked to herself, walked the forest at night, did strange things. Some claim she was a witch. This was the 1920s, mind you. Folks still believed in such things. Thomas Kerrigan defended her, said she was fine, just wanted to be left alone. But people saw what they wanted to see. What happened to her? Rae asked quietly. That's the thing. Nobody rightly knows. She lived up there for years, decades, some say. Thomas would come down to town for supplies, and people would ask about her. He'd say she was fine and tell them to mind their business. Then Thomas died, must have been the 1940s, and after that nobody saw Estelle at all. Some folks claimed they'd hear things in the woods, singing or crying or footsteps where nobody should be walking. Vernon leaned forward. Here's what you need to understand. My grandfather told me about a woman in these mountains who lost her mind. People would see her sometimes, wandering between the trees, wearing old-fashioned clothes. She'd disappear if you called out to her. They said she was the ghost of Rae Dunning, still roaming the forest because she died alone up there, and nobody ever found her body. The clerk spoke up. Vernon, you're gonna scare her. I'm not trying to scare. I'm trying to warn. Vernon looked at Rae seriously. Maybe those are just stories. Maybe Estelle died peacefully in that cabin, and nature took its course. But I've been in these mountains my whole life, and I've heard things I can't explain. Seen things, too. Something's not right in that area. If you're smart, you'll pack up and go back to Spokane. Rae bought her supplies in silence. Food, batteries, a better tarp for the roof. Vernon watched her the whole time, shaking his head. As she was leaving, he called out, You look like her, you know. Got the same stubborn set to your jaw. He paused. Whatever's up there, it's been waiting a long time. I hope you know what you're doing. Rae drove back to the trailhead, with Vernon's words echoing in her mind. The rational part of her dismissed it as small-town superstition, but another part, the part that had heard footsteps and found flowers, wasn't so sure. That night back in the cabin, Rae heard it again. Footsteps on the porch, slow and deliberate, and this time, unmistakably, the sound of someone humming. A tune she almost recognized, old and haunting. She didn't go to the door. She sat by the fire, holding the journal, and whispered into the darkness, I'm not leaving. This is my home now, too. The humming stopped. And in the silence that followed, Rae felt something shift, not threatening but acknowledging, like a presence that had been waiting and was now finally seen. The next morning, Rae woke to birdsong and weak sunlight filtering through the patched window. For a moment she lay still, listening. No footsteps. No humming, just the ordinary sounds of the forest waking up. She dressed and went outside to check the foundation repairs she'd started the day before. The cabin was settling unevenly, and she'd been digging around the base, planning to add stones to level it. It was hard work for a 62-year-old woman, but satisfying in a way her nursing career had never quite been. As she knelt to resume digging, her trowel struck something metal. She worked more carefully, uncovering what looked like a tin box, about the size of a shoebox, buried a foot deep. Rae pried it free. The box was rusted but intact, sealed with what had once been wax. She carried it inside and set it on the table she'd repaired. Her hands shook slightly as she worked the lid open. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, layered carefully with paper between each one to prevent sticking. Rae lifted them out one by one, her throat tightening. The first photos were from the 1920s. She could tell by the quality and style. Estelle, young and fierce-eyed, standing in front of the cabin. Estelle with a rifle, dressed in men's hunting clothes. Estelle kneeling by the creek, washing clothes. In several photos, a man appeared beside her, tall, lean, with dark hair and a weathered face. Thomas Kerrigan, she was certain. In those early pictures, there was a formality between them, a careful distance. Later photos showed the distance closing. Thomas with his arm around Estelle's shoulders. The two of them sitting on the porch, coffee cups in hand, almost smiling. One photo showed them working together on what looked like a new roof. Estelle holding boards while Thomas nailed them in place. Then came photos from later years. Estelle aging but still strong, her face weathered by sun and wind, her hair going grey, her hands becoming gnarled with work. But her eyes, those fierce eyes, never changed. And then Rae found the photos that made her catch her breath. A boy, maybe 8 years old, standing in front of the cabin. Solemn face, neat clothes that looked out of place in the wilderness. She flipped to the next photo. The same boy, older now, perhaps 12, holding a fishing rod. Then another at 15 or 16, taller, broader, with his mother's eyes, her father, Walter. The photos documented his visits, summers spent in these mountains with the mother who'd given him away but never truly let him go. There were dozens of them, spanning years. Walter at different ages, always looking slightly uncomfortable, as if caught between two worlds. And in several photos, Estelle stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, her expression complex, pride and pain mixed together. The most recent photos were from the 1950s, judging by the quality and Walter's age. He would have been in his 20s then, perhaps already married to Rae's mother. In one photo, he stood alone in front of the cabin, no longer a visitor but something else, a keeper of secrets maybe, or a guardian of memory. The final photo made Rae's vision blur with tears. Estelle is an old woman, probably in her 70s or 80s, sitting on the porch in a rocking chair Rae hadn't seen in the cabin. She looked directly at the camera with a slight smile, completely at peace. Her weathered hands rested on her lap. Behind her, the mountains rose in eternal stillness. On the back, in her father's handwriting, Mother, age 81, summer 1985. Rae did the math. Estelle had lived until at least 1985. That was when Rae herself was 23, newly married, pregnant with her first child. Her grandmother had been alive, had been here in this cabin, and no one had told her. She felt a surge of anger at her father, for the lies, for the secrets kept. Then she thought of Vernon's story, of the scandal and judgment Estelle had faced. Maybe Walter had been protecting his mother. Maybe he'd been honoring her choice to remain separate from the world that had condemned her. But still, Rae could have known her, could have learned from her, could have asked the questions that now had no answers. She gathered all the photographs and spread them across the floor, arranging them chronologically. They told a story, not of abandonment or madness, but of a woman who'd claimed her freedom and held on to it for 60 years. A woman who'd found a way to be both mother and solitary, to maintain connection without compromise. Rae stared at the final photo of Estelle for a long time. The peace in that face was something Rae had been seeking her entire life without knowing it. Not happiness exactly, but contentment. The deep satisfaction of living according to your own terms. She was still studying the photos when she heard it, a sound outside that made her freeze. Not footsteps this time, something else. A scraping, like someone dragging something heavy. Rae went to the window and looked out carefully. At first she saw nothing. Then movement near the tree line caught her eye. A figure, standing between two large pines, partially obscured by shadow. Wearing what looked like a long dress or skirt, something old-fashioned. The figure was too far away to make out clearly. But Rae had the distinct impression it was watching the cabin. She grabbed her jacket and went outside, calling out, "Hello? Can I help you?" The figure didn't respond. It simply stood there, motionless. Rae walked toward it, her heart hammering. The rational part of her brain insisted this had to be a person, maybe a hiker, maybe a local woman. But something about the stillness, the way the figure seemed to exist slightly apart from its surroundings, made her skin prickle. She was about 30 feet away when the figure moved. Not walking, it simply stepped sideways behind a tree and vanished. Rae ran forward, stumbling over roots and rocks. She reached the tree and looked around wildly. Nothing, no one. The forest was empty, but on the ground where the figure had stood, she found something. A small pile of stones, stacked carefully in a cairn. And beside it, another bundle of wildflowers, fresh, their stems still damp. Rae knelt and touched the stones. They were cold, solid, real. Not a hallucination. Someone or something had been here. She looked up at the trees, at the spaces between them where afternoon light slanted through. "Estelle," she said aloud. "Is that you?" No answer. Just the whisper of wind through pine needles. But as Rae walked back to the cabin, she heard it again, faint but unmistakable, humming. that same old tune, just at the edge of hearing. She recognized it now. Her father used to hum it when he worked in the garage on Sunday afternoons. She'd never known the name, but she remembered the melody perfectly. It was a lullaby, something you'd sing to a child. That night, Rae sat by the fire and made a decision. Whatever was happening here, whether supernatural or psychological, whether ghost or grief, she wasn't afraid anymore. If Estelle's spirit lingered in these mountains, then maybe it was because she'd been waiting for someone to understand, waiting for someone who wouldn't judge or pity, waiting for someone who could see her clearly. Rae opened her backpack and took out a new journal she'd bought in Thornhill. Blank pages waiting to be filled. On the first page she wrote, "My name is Rae Dunning. I'm 62 years old. I came to these mountains looking for answers about my past. What I found was my future. This cabin is my sanctuary now, and I will not be moved from it." She wrote about everything: her father's death, the map, the discovery of Estelle's journal, the photographs. She wrote about her empty house in Spokane, her scattered children, the hollow feeling of a life that had lost its purpose. And she wrote about this place, about the peace she felt here despite the strangeness, despite the whispers and footsteps and watching presence. When she finished writing, she said aloud, "Thank you for the flowers, Grandmother." The fire popped and settled. Outside, an owl called, and in the cabin's comfortable darkness, Rae felt, for the first time since arriving, like she'd truly come home. Rae spent the next days settling into a rhythm that felt ancient and right. She woke with the sun, made coffee over the fire, spent her mornings working on the cabin. She was teaching herself carpentry from necessity, watching online videos on her phone when she hiked out to where she could get signal. Then returning to put the lessons into practice, she'd replaced 2 rotted floorboards, rehung the door so it closed properly. Started thinking about the collapsed corner, a bigger job that might require help, but she'd figure it out. Physical work filled her days and left her too tired for the anxious thoughts that used to plague her nights in Spokane, and she was no longer alone. Not quite. The presence remained, though it had changed. Less intrusive now, more like companionship. Items would be moved, the coffee pot set by the fire in the morning, firewood stacked more neatly than she'd left it. Once she found her trowel cleaned and set carefully by the door after she'd left it muddy by the creek, Rae had stopped being frightened. Instead, she talked to the cabin as she worked. "I think I'll patch that section of roof next," she'd say aloud. "The tarp's not going to hold through winter." Sometimes she felt a response, not words, but a sense of agreement or encouragement. On her 11th day at the cabin, Rae decided to search for Estelle's grave. If her grandmother had died here, there had to be a burial site. The photographs prove she'd lived well into old age. Someone had to have buried her. She started by walking in expanding circles from the cabin, looking for disturbed earth or markers. The forest floor was thick with pine needles and undergrowth, making it hard to spot anything unusual. After 2 hours, hot and frustrated, Rae sat down on a fallen log to rest. That's when she heard it. Not humming this time, but something stranger. A whisper in the wind that might have been words. She stood and turned slowly, listening. The sound seemed to pull her in a direction she hadn't searched yet, deeper into the trees. Rae followed, feeling foolish, but unable to stop herself. The whisper continued, always just ahead, drawing her on. After about 15 minutes, she emerged into a small grove of aspens, their white bark glowing in the filtered sunlight. And there, at the base of the oldest tree, she found it. The gravestone was simple, a flat piece of granite with words carved deeply into its surface. Rae knelt beside it, her fingers tracing the letters. Estelle Dunning, 1904. 1987, free at last. Rae sat back, calculating. 1987. That was when Rae was 25, already a nurse, already married to Dennis, already raising 2 children with a third on the way. Her father would have been 60 years old. Still visiting, still keeping the secret. Estelle had lived to be 83. She'd survived in this wilderness for 61 years, longer than most marriages lasted, longer than many careers. She'd outlived scandal and judgment, and probably everyone who'd condemned her in 1926. Free at last, Rae read aloud. She wondered who'd chosen those words. Her father, probably, honoring what his mother had wanted most. She sat by the grave for a long time, talking to the grandmother she'd never met. She told her about Walter's life, his career as an engineer, his quiet marriage, his 3 children. She talked about her own life, about the choices she'd made and how they'd seemed right at the time, but had led to this emptiness. She told Estelle about her children scattered across the world, about Dennis's death, about waking up one morning and realizing she'd built a life that no longer needed her. "I think I understand now," Rae said. "Why you chose this. It's not about running away. It's about running toward something. Toward yourself, maybe. Toward the person you're meant to be, without all the world's expectations weighing you down." As she spoke, something shifted. The air grew warmer, or maybe it was just the afternoon sun breaking through clouds. But Rae felt a presence, stronger than before, more focused. She looked around the grove, half expecting to see someone. Instead, she heard it, clear as if someone stood beside her, humming. That same lullaby, but louder now, more distinct. And beneath the humming, words whispered so softly she almost missed them. "You were always meant to find this place." Rae's breath caught. Estelle. The humming continued, surrounding her. Not frightening, comforting, like being wrapped in something warm. The aspens rustled, though there was no wind. And for just a moment, so brief she might have imagined it, Rae saw her, a translucent figure, standing on the other side of the grave. An old woman with wild white hair and those fierce eyes Rae knew from photographs. She wore work clothes and boots, and she was smiling. Rae blinked and the figure was gone. But the humming remained for another minute before fading like smoke. She sat there until the sun moved behind the trees and shadows grew long. When she finally stood to go, she felt different, lighter somehow, as if something that had been waiting was now settled. Back at the cabin that evening, Rae built up the fire and made dinner. Instant soup and crackers, nothing fancy but satisfying. She was washing her bowl in creek water when she realized she wasn't alone. Someone was walking up the path from the direction of the trailhead. A real person this time, substantial and solid, carrying a hiking stick and moving slowly. An older man, maybe 70, with grey hair and a weathered face. He stopped when he saw her, surprise clear in his expression. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "didn't expect to find anyone here." "The cabin's occupied," Rae said, trying to sound confident. "Can I help you?" The man studied her, then the cabin. "I'll be damned. You're actually living here." "I am." "And you are?" He stepped closer, offering his hand. "Luke Kerrigan. My grandfather was Thomas Kerrigan. I make it a point to check on this place once a month or so." "Never found anyone here before." Rae shook his hand, her mind racing. "Thomas Kerrigan's grandson." "I'm Rae Dunning. Estelle was my grandmother." Luke's eyes widened. "Estelle's granddaughter, well." He let out a long breath. "That explains why you're here. My grandfather made me promise, made all of us promise, to watch over this land. Never explained why exactly, but I figured it had to do with Estelle. You knew about her?" "Knew of her." Grandpa Tom talked about her sometimes in his later years. Always got this look in his eyes, sadness mixed with something else. Love, I suppose, though he married my grandmother and had a good life with her. But Estelle was different for him, the one who got away, except she never really got away. "She was just up here." Luke gestured to the cabin. "Mind if I sit?" "It's a long hike at my age." They sat on the porch, Rae on the steps, Luke on an old stump she'd dragged over for a seat. He told her what he knew. Thomas had bought the land around the cabin in the 1930s, when it was cheap. He deeded it to Walter eventually, with the stipulation that it remain undeveloped. The Kerrigan family had maintained the boundary markers and kept an eye on things for decades. "There's about 160 acres, Luke said. "Worthless for most purposes, too remote for development, too rocky for farming. But my grandfather insisted it stay protected. He made it part of his will that we couldn't sell it or develop it. And he made Walter promise the same thing. Did you ever meet Estelle?" Rae asked. "Once, when I was maybe 10 years old. Grandpa Tom brought me up here. She was ancient then, probably in her 70s. Frightened me a little. She was so different from other old women I knew. Tough as leather. She looked at me and said, "You've got his eyes," meant my grandfather. Then she gave me a stone from the creek and told me to keep it safe. I still have it. They talked until dark. Luke promised to come back in a few weeks with supplies and tools that might help with repairs. As he prepared to hike out by headlamp, he paused. "You planning to stay through winter?" "I am," he nodded slowly. "It's hard country. You'll need to be prepared. Snow comes early up here and stays late. You'll be cut off completely for months." "I know. And there are other things." He hesitated. "Folks in town talk about this place. Say it's haunted. I've never seen anything myself, but I've felt it. Something watching. Something that doesn't want strangers here." "I'm not a stranger," Rae said quietly. "I'm family," Luke smiled. "I believe Estelle would say the same thing." "All right, then. I'll see you in a few weeks. And ma'am, I'm glad someone's finally here. Grandpa Tom would be pleased to know the cabin has a keeper again." After he left, Rae sat by the fire and added to her journal. She wrote about finding the grave, about the vision, if that's what it was, of Estelle, about Luke's visit and the promise his grandfather had made. And she wrote, "I understand now. This isn't haunting. It's waiting. Estelle has been here all along, watching over this place, waiting for someone who would understand her choice. I think I'm that person. I think this is where I was always meant to be." That night, she slept deeply and dreamed of an old woman teaching her to read the forest, which plants were food, which were medicine, how to move silently through the trees. In the dream, Estelle smiled and said, "You're learning, granddaughter. You're finally learning." 2 days after Luke's visit, Rae found the letters. She'd been cleaning the chimney, a messy job, but necessary before winter. The flue had accumulated decades of soot and bird nests. As she reached up to clear a particularly stubborn blockage, something fell down. Not debris, but a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Rae carried it outside into better light. The oilcloth was brittle, but had protected what was inside. A packet of letters tied with string that had once been white, but was now yellowed with age. She untied the string carefully and spread the letters out. There were 23 of them, all addressed to Estelle Dunning at the cabin, Snowmelt Creek. The return address was consistent. Thomas Kerrigan, General Delivery, Thornhill, Montana. The earliest letter was dated 1926. Rae opened it with trembling fingers. "Dear Estelle, I know you said you wanted to be left alone, but I can't stop thinking about you up there. I brought you supplies today, but you weren't there, and it worried me. Please leave a sign if you need anything. I'll check back weekly. Yours, Thomas." The letters progressed through years. Rae read them chronologically, watching a relationship unfold in careful handwriting on aging paper. The early letters were formal, concerned. Thomas checking on Estelle's welfare, offering help, teaching her survival skills. Then they became warmer. A letter from 1927, after Walter's birth. "I will love that boy as my own, though I know you won't let me claim him. I wish you would reconsider. We could be a family, the 3 of us. But I will respect your wishes, as I always have." Letters from the 1930s showed Thomas had married someone else. "Her name is Ruth. She's kind and she'll make a good wife. I want you to know I'll be happy, but I'll never stop checking on you. That's a promise I made and I'm keeping it." The 1940s letters were fewer but deeper. Thomas writing about the war, about Walter visiting from Seattle, about the land he'd bought to protect the cabin. "I've put it all in legal papers that this place stays wild. When I'm gone, it'll go to Walter. He understands, I think, what you've built here. He understands why it matters." One letter from 1945 made Rae's throat tighten. "My Ruth died yesterday. Cancer. It was peaceful at the end. She knew about you. I told her years ago. She understood, bless her. She said every man is allowed one great love, even if it doesn't work out the way he hoped. I'm 60 now and you're 51. We're not young anymore. Would you reconsider? We could spend our last years together. I'm not asking you to leave the cabin. I'm asking if I can stay." Rae turned the letter over, looking for Estelle's response. Instead, she found it drafted on the back of another letter in Estelle's handwriting. "Thomas, my dear friend, you honor me more than you know, but I cannot marry you. Not because I don't care for you, you know I do, but because I have worked too hard for my freedom to give it up now, even for love. Especially for love. Come visit. Bring your coffee. Sit with me on the porch. But don't ask me to change what I am. I won't do it. The final letter was dated 1959. Thomas would have been 74. His handwriting was shakier but still legible. Estelle, I'm not well. The doctors say my heart is giving out. I wanted you to know that you were the great adventure of my life. Everything good I did, the land I protected, the help I gave others, even the love I shared with Ruth, it all came from learning to respect your choice. You taught me that love isn't ownership. That's a lesson most men never learn. Thank you for letting me be part of your life, even on your terms. The Kerrigan boys will keep watching over the land. They promised. You'll be safe here always. With love and respect, Thomas. Rae wiped tears from her face. She found one more document in the packet, a legal deed. Thomas had indeed bought the surrounding land, then deeded it to Walter with explicit conservation restrictions. No development, no logging, no subdivision. The land was to remain wild in perpetuity. She understood now. This hadn't been just about protecting Estelle. It was about honoring her vision, a piece of wilderness kept free from the world's encroachment. Thomas had loved her enough to make sure her sanctuary remained intact, even after she was gone. Rae spent the afternoon reading and rereading the letters, seeing her grandmother through Thomas's eyes. A woman so determined to be free that she'd given up everything, child, comfort, companionship, to live on her own terms. And a man who'd loved her enough to let her. That evening, Rae's phone buzzed with signal. She'd left it by the window where it occasionally caught a bar of service. Multiple missed calls from her sister Linda, 7 voicemails. Against her better judgment, Rae listened to them. The first was worried. "Rae, where are you?" "Michael called me. He's been trying to reach you." "Call me back." The second was annoyed. "It's been 2 weeks. This is ridiculous. Just call and tell us you're okay." By the 7th, Linda was angry. "Fine. If you want to pull this disappearing act, that's your choice. But we're all worried sick. Robert wants to file a missing person report." "I told him you're probably fine, just being selfish as usual." "Call us." Rae closed her eyes. She should call. She knew that. But she wasn't ready to explain, wasn't ready to defend her choice to people who would never understand it. Finally, she compromised. She texted Linda, "I'm fine. Needed some time alone. We'll call soon." Linda's response came immediately. "Where are you?" Rae typed, "Somewhere I need to be." "Don't worry." Then she turned the phone off completely. That night brought the strongest presence yet. Rae woke around midnight to find the cabin filled with soft light, not from the fire, which had burned down to embers, but from something else. A glow that seemed to come from the walls themselves. She sat up slowly. The temperature had dropped significantly. Her breath misted in the air despite the season. And standing by the fireplace, translucent but clearly visible, was Estelle. The apparition looked as she had in the later photographs, elderly, white-haired, wearing the same work clothes. She wasn't frightening. If anything, she looked peaceful. Rae found her voice. "Grandmother?" The figure turned to her and Rae saw her face clearly. Those fierce eyes, that stubborn jaw. She looked so much like Walter, so much like Rae herself. Estelle didn't speak, but Rae heard words anyway, not in her ears but in her mind, clear as if someone had spoken aloud. "You understand now. Why I stayed. Why I chose this." "I do," Rae whispered. "I understand completely. This place needed a keeper, someone who would protect it, honor it. Your father tried, but he had his own life. He did what he could. But you..." The ghostly figure smiled. "You're like me. You finally found your way home. Am I losing my mind?" Rae asked. "Is this real? Does it matter? You're here. You're staying. That's all that counts." The light began to fade. Estelle's form became less distinct, bleeding back into shadows. "Wait," Rae called. "Don't go yet. I have so many questions." But the presence was already gone, leaving only the cold and the dying embers, and Rae sitting alone in her sleeping bag, wondering if she'd dreamed it all, except on the table, arranged carefully, were the letters she'd left scattered. They were now stacked neatly and tied with the original string. On top was a single wildflower, a mountain aster fresh and purple in the moonlight. Rae got up and added wood to the fire. She made tea and sat wrapped in blankets, writing in her journal about everything, the letters, the vision, the sense of rightness that pervaded everything. She wrote, "I think Estelle has been here all along, watching, waiting for someone who would understand. Not haunting, guiding, making sure this place survived until the right person came. I think I'm that person. I think this is my inheritance. Not just the land and cabin, but the responsibility to keep it safe, to keep it free." As dawn broke, Rae made a decision. She would stay through winter. She would make this cabin truly livable. And she would honor Estelle's legacy by living the same way, on her own terms, beholden to no one, free in a way she'd never been in 62 years of conventional life. Outside, the forest was waking up. Birds called. The creek burbled. And somewhere in the trees, Rae heard it one more time. That old lullaby hummed softly, fading into morning. She smiled and whispered, "Thank you, grandmother. Thank you for showing me the way." Rae spent the next week in a state of determined productivity. She patched the worst of the roof holes, chinked gaps between logs with a mixture of mud and pine needles, started stockpiling firewood for winter, splitting logs with an old axe she'd found in the crawl space. Her hands developed blisters that hardened into calluses. Her back ached constantly. She'd never felt better. Luke returned as promised, bringing tools and supplies. He also brought his grandson, a quiet teenager named Cole, who looked at the cabin with obvious skepticism but said nothing disrespectful. Together, the three of them tackled the collapsed corner, jacking up the structure and replacing the rotted sill log with fresh timber Luke had brought. "You're serious about staying," Luke observed as they worked. "I am. Winter's no joke up here. You'll need more supplies, better insulation, probably a generator for emergencies. I'll manage." Cole spoke up, surprising them both. "My great-great-grandfather lived up here without electricity or generators. If he could do it, she can," Luke smiled. The boys got a point. After they left, Rae continued her work. She was reinforcing the foundation on the south side when her trowel struck something hard and metallic. At first she thought it was a rock, but the sound was wrong. She dug more carefully, uncovering what looked like a metal box, similar to the one that had held the photographs, but larger. This box was sealed with wax and wrapped in canvas. Rae's heart raced as she pried it free and carried it inside. The seal was intact. Whatever was inside had been protected from moisture and time. She broke the seal and opened the lid. Inside were documents, official papers in plastic sleeves, birth certificates, legal forms, and letters, these ones addressed not to Estelle but from her. The first document Rae examined was a birth certificate. Walter Dunning, born April 12, 1927. Mother, Estelle Dunning. Father, unknown. Place of birth, home. Attending physician, none. Beneath it was a custody agreement dated June 1927. Estelle's younger sister Margaret agreed to raise Walter in Seattle. The document was surprisingly formal, notarized and witnessed. It outlined visitation rights. Walter would spend summers with Estelle once he was old enough to make the journey safely. Then came the letters. The first was from Estelle to Margaret, dated June 1927. "Sister, I know what people will say. That I'm abandoning my child. That I'm selfish and unnatural. Let them say it. I know the truth. I cannot give Walter the life he deserves. Education, opportunity, a place in society. But I will not give him up entirely. He is my son. He will know me. He will understand, when he's old enough, why I made this choice. You will give him the world. I will give him the mountains. Together we'll give him everything." Rae's vision blurred. This wasn't abandonment. This was sacrifice, the kind no one would recognize or honor, but sacrifice nonetheless. More letters followed, documenting an arrangement that lasted decades. Margaret writing to Estelle about Walter's progress in school, his achievements, his questions about his mother. Estelle writing back with advice, with love, with determination that he know his heritage. And then Rae found the legal documents that changed everything. A property deed dated 1945, transferring ownership of the cabin and surrounding land from Thomas Kerrigan to Walter Dunning. The deed included a letter from Thomas explaining the conservation restrictions, the promise he'd made to Estelle, the importance of keeping the land wild, but attached to that deed was something else, a letter from Walter to Thomas, dated the same year. Walter would have been 18, just graduated from high school. "Mr. Kerrigan, I accept the responsibility you're giving me. I understand what Mother has built here, what you've protected. I know people judge her. They see abandonment where there was actually love. They see madness where there was clarity. I spent my childhood summers in these mountains. I know what she sacrificed for me and what she held on to for herself. I will keep this land safe. I will honor her choice. And when the time comes, I will pass this responsibility to someone who understands, someone who needs it the way she did. Your grateful friend, Walter." Rae sat back, the letter trembling in her hands. Her father had understood. He'd known all along what Estelle had done and why. The silence, the emotional distance she'd interpreted as coldness, maybe it had been protection. Maybe he'd been keeping Estelle's secret, honoring her privacy, waiting until someone in the family needed this place the way she had. There were more documents, records showing Walter had visited the cabin regularly until the 1980s, tax payments he'd made on the land, correspondence with county officials maintaining the conservation status. And then, in 1987, a death certificate, Estelle Dunning, dated August 14, 1987, at her residence. Cause of death, natural causes. Age 83. Witness, Walter Dunning. Clipped to the death certificate was a handwritten note in her father's shaky script. She died as she lived, on her own terms. Found her on the porch at sunrise, coffee cup still in her hand, watching the mountains. There was a smile on her face. I buried her in the aspen grove she loved, marked her grave as she'd asked. "Free at last," she told me to write. "Make sure they know I was free. I will keep her secret a while longer, until someone needs it, until someone understands." Tears streamed down Rae's face. The pieces were falling into place. Her father had died 6 months ago. He'd hidden the map in his Bible, knowing someone would find it. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. And he'd bet on Rae, the middle child, the caretaker, the one who'd spent her life serving others' needs. He'd known she'd be the one to empty his belongings, to find the map, to be curious enough to follow it. He'd left her an inheritance that wasn't money or property. It was permission. Permission to choose something different. Permission to claim her own sanctuary. There was one final document in the box. An envelope addressed simply, "To my children." Rae recognized her father's handwriting. She opened it with shaking hands. "Dear Robert, Linda, and Rae," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and one of you has found the cabin. I hope it's Rae. She's the one who'll understand best. But whoever you are, listen carefully. The story you were told about my mother was a lie. A necessary lie, but a lie nonetheless. Estelle Dunning didn't die giving birth to me. She lived until 1987 in the cabin where I was born. She chose that life deliberately, and she never regretted it. The cabin and land at the coordinates shown on the map are held in perpetual family trust. They cannot be sold or developed. The taxes are supposed to be paid annually by my estate lawyer. Make sure this happens. Whichever of you finds the cabin, is meant to be its keeper. Don't let them take it. Don't let the world destroy what she built. This is where our family learned to be free. Honor that. Protect it. And if you need it, if life has left you feeling empty and purposeless, know that this place is waiting. It's always been waiting. With love, Walter. Rae read the letter 3 times. Then she noticed something else. Clipped to the back was a legal document she'd almost missed, a codicil to her father's will, dated 1 week before his death. It specified the cabin property exactly, coordinates, acreage, legal description. It named all 3 children as inheritors, but included a provision. Whoever took actual residence within 1 year of Walter's death would gain full ownership, with the conservation restrictions intact. Her father had created a mechanism for the property to pass to whoever needed it most. And he'd been right. It was Rae. But as she read the tax information, her stomach dropped. The estate lawyer had apparently failed to pay property taxes for the past 6 years. There was a notice from the county. She'd almost overlooked it. Folded at the bottom of the box. Unpaid taxes totaling $47,000. A hearing scheduled for December 15th to determine disposition of the property. If no heir came forward to pay and claim the land, it would be declared abandoned and opened for sale. Rae checked the date. It was now November 20th. She had less than a month. Her retirement savings could cover it barely. But that was everything she had. And her siblings would have to formally accept or refuse their share of the inheritance. She'd have to contact them, explain everything, fight for property they probably wouldn't even want. The revelation crashed over her like cold water. This place, her sanctuary, Estelle's legacy, her father's gift, was in danger. Not from nature or time, but from bureaucracy and her own family's neglect. That night, Rae sat by the fire trying to process everything. The full story of Estelle's life, her father's lifelong secret-keeping, the legal danger threatening the land. She felt overwhelmed and inadequate, and then she felt it, that presence again, stronger than before. The temperature dropped. The firelight flickered. And standing in the corner of the cabin, more solid than she'd ever appeared, was Estelle. She looked as she had in life, old but strong, weathered but unbroken. Her eyes met Rae's with an intensity that made everything else fall away. "They will try to take it," Estelle's voice said, clear as if she stood next to her. "The world always wants to reclaim what we keep apart. But you're stronger than you know. You're my blood, my granddaughter. Fight for it." "I don't know if I can," Rae whispered. "You can, because you understand what it means. Not just land, freedom, the right to choose your own path, to live on your own terms. That's worth fighting for." The apparition faded, but her final words hung in the air. "This is your sanctuary now. Claim it." Rae sat in the darkness long after. The presence departed. Then she opened her journal and began making plans. She would fight. She would pay the taxes. She would face her siblings and the county and whatever legal complications arose. Because Estelle was right, this place was worth it. This was her sanctuary now, and she would not let anyone take it away. The next morning, Rae hiked out to her car and drove to Thornhill. She needed phone service, internet, and time to understand exactly what she was facing. At the local diner, the only place with reliable Wi-Fi, she spread out the documents and began making calls. First, her father's estate lawyer. The man was apologetic and defensive in equal measure. Yes, he'd failed to pay the property taxes. The property hadn't been listed in the main inventory, only in that codicil, and he'd honestly forgotten about it. The county had sent notices to her father's old address, which had been cleared out months ago. Everything had fallen through the cracks. "Can we fix this?" Rae asked. "If you can pay the back taxes and penalties before the hearing, yes. But there's another complication. Cascade Development Corporation has filed an interest claim. They're arguing the property should be considered abandoned and opened for public sale." Rae's blood ran cold. They can do that? They can argue it. Whether they'll succeed depends on the county commissioners. But you need to be at that hearing. And you need to demonstrate clear family connection and intent to maintain the property. Next, she called her siblings. Robert answered on the fourth ring, impatient as always. "Rae, where the hell have you been?" Linda said you texted but wouldn't say where. "I found Dad's cabin." Silence. "Then what cabin?" She explained everything. The map, Estelle's story, the property in the mountains. Robert listened with growing irritation. "So you've been playing Mountain Woman for 3 weeks, while we've been worried sick." "I'm not playing. I'm staying here, and we have a legal problem." She outlined the tax situation and the upcoming hearing. Robert's response was immediate. "Sell it. Split whatever we can get and be done with it. It can't be sold. Conservation restrictions. And I don't want to sell it. I want to keep it. For what? To live like a hermit?" "Rae, you're 62 years old. This is crazy. The property has to stay in the family, or it goes to public auction. If you want your share, you need to help pay the back taxes. Robert laughed harshly. I'm not throwing money at some shack in the woods. If you want it, it's yours. I'll sign whatever paperwork releases my claim. Linda was even worse. She was furious about the worry, about the time wasted, about what she called Ray's breakdown in the woods. Mom would be horrified, Linda said. Dad would be... She stopped. Wait, did Dad know about this place? He left me the map. He wanted one of us to find it. That's insane. He was 93. He probably didn't know what he was doing. He knew exactly what he was doing. Linda, I need you to either help with the taxes or sign over your share. I'll sign whatever. I want nothing to do with this, but Rae, you need to think about what you're doing. You have children, grandchildren. They need you. They don't need me, Rae said quietly. They have their own lives. And I finally have mine. After she hung up, Rae sat in the diner nursing cold coffee, feeling shaky but resolute. Her siblings thought she was crazy. Maybe she was. But she was also more certain of this choice than anything she'd done in decades. She called her children next. The conversations were difficult. Michael was worried, but tried to be supportive. Sarah was judgmental, suggesting therapy and accusing Rae of running away from her problems. James was mostly silent, then said, If this is what you need, Mom, okay. But we're here when you come back to reality. When you come back, not if. They all assumed this was temporary. A phase, a breakdown she'd recover from. Rae didn't argue. She simply said, I love you all. I'm fine. I'll call regularly. She found a lawyer in Thornhill, a young woman named Jessica Reeves, who'd recently opened a practice after working in Missoula. Jessica listened to the whole story, examined the documents, and nodded slowly. The legal situation is actually pretty strong, Jessica said. Your father's codicil is clear, and the conservation restrictions are properly recorded. The problem is demonstrating continuous family stewardship. The county sees 6 years of unpaid taxes and assumes abandonment, but I'm there now. Doesn't that count? It helps, but you've only been there a few weeks. Cascade Development will argue you're a recent squatter, not a legitimate heir maintaining family property. What do I need? Documentation. Prove your family's continuous connection to the property. The photographs, the journals, the letters, all of that helps. Character witnesses who can testify to the family's historical connection. And most importantly, demonstrate your intent to maintain the property going forward. Rae spread out everything she'd found. Estelle's journal, Thomas's letters, the photographs spanning decades, Walter's documentation. Jessica examined it all carefully. This is actually remarkable, she said. You've got a paper trail going back to 1926. That's powerful. And if we can find people who remember Estelle or your father visiting the property, that strengthens our case significantly. Thomas Kerrigan's grandson, Luke. He knows the whole story. Perfect. Anyone else? Rae thought about Vernon at the general store. There's an old man in town who knew about Estelle. Vernon Haskell. Jessica made notes. We'll need to prepare thoroughly. The hearing is December 15th, less than 4 weeks. We need to document everything, line up witnesses, and be ready for Cascade to fight dirty. They want that land for development. What kind of development? Luxury wilderness resort. They've been buying up property in this region for years. They need your parcel to complete their plan. Without it, they can't proceed. The weight of it settled on Rae. This wasn't just about her. It was about keeping wilderness wild, honoring Estelle's vision, protecting something irreplaceable from commercial exploitation. She spent the rest of the day working with Jessica, organizing documents, preparing her case. When she finally drove back to the trailhead, it was nearly dark. She made the hike by headlamp, exhausted but determined. Luke showed up 2 days later, as if summoned by need rather than schedule. Rae told him everything, the hearing, Cascade Development, the fight ahead. His face grew grim. They approached me too, he said. Offered me twice market value for the Kerrigan land. Said they'd make me rich. I told them my grandfather would rise from his grave to haunt me if I sold. Will you testify? About Thomas's relationship with Estelle, about the promises made. Absolutely. And I'll bring documentation. My grandfather's land purchase records, his will with the conservation provisions. This goes beyond one family. This is about keeping wildness alive in a world that wants everything tamed and profitable. Over the next 2 weeks, Rae split her time between the cabin and preparation for the hearing. She photographed everything: the cabin, the grave, the surrounding forest. She wrote detailed accounts of the property's history. She met with Vernon Haskell, who agreed to testify despite his reservations about the hauntings. Estelle Dunning was a stubborn woman, Vernon said. Caused a lot of talk in her day, but she never hurt anyone. And she loved this land the way most people love other people. If you're half as committed as she was, you've got a fighting chance. Jessica worked tirelessly, building their case. She discovered that Cascade Development had violated environmental regulations on other projects, which could undermine their credibility. She found obscure property law that supported continuous family ownership even without physical occupancy. But she was also realistic. The commissioners are under pressure to approve development. It brings jobs, tax revenue. We're asking them to choose wilderness over economic growth. That's a hard sell. Rae returned to the cabin each night, exhausted from planning and preparation. The presence Estelle remained, though less visible now. Sometimes Rae would hear humming, or find flowers on the porch, or wake to find the fire stoked in the night. It felt like encouragement, like Estelle saying, "Keep fighting." 1 week before the hearing, Rae's retirement account statement arrived at the general store, forwarded from Spokane. She'd arranged to have the funds transferred, ready to pay the back taxes if they won. Looking at the balance, nearly depleted, gave her a moment of vertigo. This was everything she had. If she lost the hearing, she'd be broke and homeless. But as she hiked back to the cabin that evening, she realized she didn't care. The worst they could do was take the property. They couldn't take what she'd found here: purpose, peace, connection to something larger than herself. Even if she lost the cabin, she'd found herself. That was worth the risk. The night before the hearing, Rae couldn't sleep. She sat by the fire reading Estelle's journal one more time. The passages about choosing freedom over security, about building a life that mattered on your own terms, about refusing to let the world define what a woman's life should look like. She thought about her own life, the decades of meeting others' expectations, of being the good nurse, the good wife, the good mother. All worthy roles, but never quite her. Here in this cabin, working with her hands, living simply, she'd finally found the person she'd been all along. Around midnight, the presence returned, stronger than ever, almost tangible. Rae looked up to see Estelle standing by the door, clearer than she'd ever appeared. The old woman smiled. "Tomorrow," Estelle's voice said. "Tomorrow you fight, not just for the land, for yourself. For every woman who's been told what she should want, who she should be. You're my legacy, granddaughter. Show them what we're made of." "I'm scared," Rae admitted. "Good. Fear means it matters. But you're ready. You've always been ready. You just needed to find your way here." The figure faded, but Rae felt something settle inside her, a deep certainty that whatever happened tomorrow, she'd already won the most important battle. She'd claimed her sanctuary. She'd found her truth. At dawn, Rae dressed in her best clothes, the same ones she'd worn to her father's funeral. She packed the documents carefully in a leather satchel. Before leaving, she stood at Estelle's grave and spoke aloud. "Thank you for waiting for me. Thank you for showing me the way. Whatever happens today, I'm not giving up. This is my sanctuary now, and I'll fight for it with everything I have." The aspens rustled, though there was no wind, and Rae could have sworn she heard, very faintly, the sound of approval, a whispered yes carried on the morning air. She shouldered her pack and began the hike out, ready for the fight of her life. The courthouse in Thornhill was a modest building, brick and functional, that also housed the county offices and sheriff's department. Rae arrived an hour early, her stomach tight with nerves. Jessica was already there, organizing documents at a table in the small hearing room. "You ready?" Jessica asked. Rae nodded, not trusting her voice. Luke arrived next, dressed in a clean flannel shirt and carrying a folder of his own documents. He squeezed Rae's shoulder. "We've got this." Vernon Haskell shuffled in, leaning on a cane but sharp-eyed as ever. Never thought I'd be defending Estelle Dunning's memory, he muttered. Life's funny that way. Ray's siblings appeared on the video screen at the front of the room. Neither had bothered to come in person. Robert looked impatient. Linda looked disapproving. Both had already signed documents relinquishing their claims to the property, which simplified things legally, but felt like abandonment emotionally. The 3 county commissioners entered, 2 men and 1 woman, all middle-aged, wearing expressions of professional neutrality. Then came Cascade Development's representatives. 2 lawyers in expensive suits and a company vice president named Martin Graves, who looked like he'd stepped out of a corporate brochure. The lead commissioner, a weathered man named Harris, called the hearing to order. We're here to determine disposition of the property identified as the Dunning parcel, approximately 160 acres on Snowmelt Creek. Currently in tax default status, Ms. Dunning is claiming family inheritance and right of ownership. Cascade Development Corporation has filed an interest claim, arguing abandonment. Ms. Dunning, you go first. Jessica stood, confident and prepared. She outlined the property's history, Walter's ownership, the conservation restrictions. She presented the codicil showing Ray's inheritance right. Cascade's lead lawyer, a man named Thornton, interrupted. The codicil requires residency within 1 year of Walter Dunning's death. Ms. Dunning only arrived at the property 6 weeks ago. That's hardly continuous family stewardship. And before that, the property was unoccupied and untaxed for 6 years. That constitutes abandonment under county code. Jessica countered. Abandonment requires intent. The failure to pay taxes was administrative error by the estate lawyer, not intentional neglect. And Ms. Dunning has established continuous residency since discovering her inheritance. The codicil's purpose was to ensure someone who valued the property would claim it. Ms. Dunning has done exactly that. For 6 weeks, Thornton said dismissively. Before that, nothing. No family presence, no maintenance, no indication anyone cared about this property. My client is prepared to pay full back taxes, plus purchase the land at fair market value. They'll develop it responsibly, creating jobs and revenue for the county. Commissioner Harris looked at the documents. Ms. Reeves, can you demonstrate continuous family connection prior to your client's recent arrival? This was the moment they'd prepared for. Jessica nodded to Ray, who stood with trembling hands. My grandmother, Estelle Dunning, built that cabin in 1926, Ray said. She lived there for 61 years. My father visited regularly from childhood through the 1980s. I have photographs documenting this, decades of images showing continuous family presence. She presented the photos, spreading them on the table. The commissioners leaned forward, examining them carefully. Images of Estelle at different ages. Walter as a child, a teenager, an adult, always at the cabin. These show historical connection, Thornton argued, not continuous stewardship. The last documented presence is 1987. That's nearly 40 years ago. My father maintained the property legally, Ray said. He paid taxes for decades. He kept the conservation restrictions active. The recent lapse was error, not intent. Martin Graves from Cascade spoke for the first time. Commissioners, with respect, we're talking about prime recreational land going unused. Ms. Dunning is a 62-year-old woman living alone in a primitive cabin. How long can she realistically maintain this? Meanwhile, our development would serve hundreds of families seeking wilderness experiences. Wilderness experiences in a luxury resort, Jessica said sharply. That's not wilderness. That's commodification. The female commissioner named Walsh spoke up. Ms. Dunning, are you actually living at this property? Full-time. Yes, ma'am. I've been there 6 weeks. I'm making repairs, winterizing, planning to stay permanently. At your age? Through winter? She sounded skeptical. Luke stood without being asked. Commissioners, may I speak? Harris nodded. You're listed as a witness. Go ahead, Mr. Kerrigan. My grandfather, Thomas Kerrigan, bought the surrounding land specifically to protect the Dunning property. He made it his life's mission to preserve this area. The Kerrigan family has honored that promise for 80 years. We've watched over that cabin, maintained boundaries, prevented encroachment. Miss Dunning isn't alone up there. She has our support, our knowledge, our commitment to help her maintain the property exactly as her grandmother and my grandfather intended." "That's very touching," Thornton said, "but it doesn't address the legal abandonment issue. 6 years of unpaid taxes, 6 years of no demonstrated family presence. The property should revert to county control and be made available for sale." Vernon raised his hand. Harris looked surprised but nodded for him to speak. "I'm 80 years old," Vernon said. "I've lived in these mountains my whole life. I knew about Estelle Dunning, everybody did. Folks said terrible things about her, called her crazy, said she was cursed. But she stayed. And you know what? She was right. She knew something we're forgetting. Some places need to stay wild. Some places aren't meant to be developed and packaged and sold. That woman fought for her freedom her whole life. Her granddaughter's doing the same thing. Maybe that counts for something?" Commissioner Walsh looked at the photographs again, her expression softening. "These are remarkable. Such a long family history that ended decades ago," Thornton pressed. "Commissioners, you have an opportunity to bring economic development to this county. Jobs, revenue, growth. Or you can give property to someone who's been there 6 weeks and may not last the winter. That's not good stewardship. That's sentiment." Commissioner Harris held up his hand. "We'll take a brief recess to review materials and deliberate." 30 minutes. The commissioners stood and filed into a back office. Rae sat down heavily, her legs weak. Jessica put a hand on her arm. "You did well. Now we wait." The 30 minutes felt like hours. Rae sat in the hallway outside the hearing room, unable to sit still. She paced, checked her phone obsessively, though there was nothing to check, drank water from the fountain until her stomach sloshed. Luke sat calmly on a bench, his weathered hands folded. Vernon had stepped outside to smoke. Jessica reviewed her notes, preparing for potential follow-up questions. On the video screen visible through the doorway, Rae's siblings had muted their feeds but were clearly arguing about something. She didn't care what. They'd made their choice. This was hers. Finally, the commissioners returned. Everyone filed back into the hearing room. Harris's face was unreadable as he shuffled papers and consulted with his colleagues in whispers. "We've reviewed the materials," Harris began. "This is a complicated case. On one hand, there's clear family connection to the property, documented over decades. The photographs are compelling evidence of continuous family involvement. On the other hand, there's been a significant lapse in active stewardship and tax payment." Rae's heart sank. That sounded like a ruling against her. Harris continued, "However, Ms. Dunning has demonstrated current residency and clear intent to maintain the property. The conservation restrictions are properly recorded and legally binding. And frankly, Cascade Development's plan conflicts with the express wishes of the property's previous owners." Martin Graves leaned forward. "Commissioners, we're prepared to work within the conservation framework. Your development plan calls for a 100-room lodge and 30 luxury cabins," Commissioner Walsh interrupted, looking at documents in front of her. "That's not conservation. That's commercialization." Graves opened his mouth, then closed it. Thornton tried to intervene. "The county code clearly states—" "The county code," Harris said firmly, "gives us discretion in cases of family property with historical significance. And this property clearly qualifies." He looked directly at Rae. "Ms. Dunning, the back taxes plus penalties total $47,000. Can you pay that amount within 90 days? Rae's mouth was dry. "Yes, sir. I can pay it. And you understand that you must maintain continuous residency or designate an heir who will. You can't just hold the property vacant." "I understand. I'm living there now, permanently." Harris exchanged glances with the other commissioners. Walsh nodded. The third commissioner, who'd been silent throughout, also nodded. "Then here's our ruling," Harris said. "The property remains with the Dunning family. Ms. Dunning is recognized as the legal heir and owner, subject to payment of back taxes and penalties within 90 days. The conservation restrictions remain in place and are not subject to modification or removal. Cascade Development's interest claim is denied." For a moment, Rae couldn't breathe. Then the words sank in and she felt her knees go weak. She'd won. The cabin was hers. Thornton stood immediately. "Commissioners, we intend to appeal this decision." There are clear grounds you can appeal, Harris said. But I'll tell you right now, it won't go anywhere. The family claim is legitimate. The property transfers legally. You're wasting your time and your client's money. Martin Graves looked furious, but said nothing. He gathered his papers and walked out, his lawyers following. On the video screen, Linda had unmuted her feed. Ray, are you seriously going to pay that much money for a shack in the woods? I am. You're throwing away your retirement for this fantasy. No, Ray said quietly. I'm investing my retirement in my life. There's a difference, Robert's voice. Don't come crying to us when you realize you've made a mistake. I won't. Ray stood and moved closer to the camera. I love you both. I'm grateful you signed over your claims. But this is my choice to make, and I'm making it. Goodbye. She nodded to someone off screen, and the video connection ended. Commissioner Walsh approached Ray as people began filing out. I read your grandmother's journal entries that you submitted. The excerpts, I mean. She was a remarkable woman. She was. What you're doing, it's not easy. Living alone that far from help, especially at our age. Walsh was probably in her 50s. But I admire it. I think we've lost something in our rush toward comfort and convenience. Your grandmother understood that. I hope you can maintain what she built. I will, Ray said. I promise. Outside the courthouse, Luke wrapped her in a brief, solid hug. Congratulations. You did it, we did it. I couldn't have won without your testimony. Grandpa Tom would be proud. Both of them. Estelle and Thomas, they'd be proud of what you're doing. Vernon shook her hand with surprising strength. You proved me wrong. I thought you'd run, but you're as stubborn as your grandmother. That's a compliment, by the way. Jessica was practical. We need to process the tax payment as soon as possible. And I'll file the formal ownership transfer documents. You should have clear title within 2 weeks. Ray signed papers, wrote a check that made her savings account nearly empty, and completed the administrative requirements in a daze. When it was finally done, she walked out of the courthouse into cold December sunshine. She stood on the steps, breathing deeply. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already white with snow. Somewhere up there, hidden in the pines, was her cabin, her home, her sanctuary. Luke offered to drive her back to the trailhead, but Ray wanted to walk through town first, to let the victory settle in. She stopped at the general store and bought supplies, coffee, flour, batteries, candles. The clerk who'd warned her away that first day looked at her differently now. Heard you won the hearing, he said. I did. Good. That Cascade outfit, they've been buying up everything. Nice to see someone stand up to them, Ray smiled. Some things are worth standing up for. She loaded her purchases into her car and drove to the trailhead. The hike in felt different this time, lighter, despite the heavy pack. She was walking toward home, not just exploring, walking toward a life she'd chosen, not one that had been chosen for her. As she approached the cabin, the late afternoon sun was slanting through the trees, turning everything golden. And on the porch, arranged carefully, was a bouquet of wildflowers, the last of the season, their colors vibrant against the weathered wood. Ray smiled and whispered, I did it, grandmother. The cabin's safe. Our sanctuary is safe. The forest seemed to sigh with satisfaction. And Ray knew with absolute certainty that she was finally truly home. 3 months later, deep winter had settled over the Bitterroot Mountains. Snow lay thick on the ground, muffling sound, transforming the forest into something pristine and otherworldly. The cabin sat in its clearing like a small fortress against the cold, smoke rising steadily from the chimney. Inside, Ray sat at the repaired table, writing in her journal by lamplight. Her hands, roughened by months of work, moved steadily across the page. She'd filled 2 journals already and had started a third, documenting everything just as Estelle had done. The cabin bore little resemblance to the wreck she'd found in November. The roof was solid now, the logs properly chinked, the windows sealed and covered with shutters Ray had built herself. A wood stove Luke had helped her install provided steady heat. Shelves lined the walls holding supplies, jars of preserved vegetables she'd learned to put up, dried meat, flour, coffee, medical supplies. She'd even rigged a simple solar panel system for charging her phone and a battery lamp. But more than the physical improvements, the cabin felt lived in, felt loved. Photographs hung on the walls. Estelle at different ages, Walter as a boy, Rae's own children. Her nursing credentials sat on a shelf, a reminder of who she'd been. Next to them, her new skills, books on wilderness survival, carpentry, wild edibles, traditional medicine. The supernatural presence had faded. Not vanished entirely. Occasionally Rae would wake to find the fire stoked or hear faint humming on the wind. But Estelle's spirit seemed satisfied now. The cabin had a keeper. The sanctuary was protected. She could rest. Rae had visitors. Luke came once a month, always bringing supplies and news from town. He'd become a true friend, teaching her skills his grandfather had learned from Estelle, how to read animal tracks, where to find medicinal plants, how to predict weather. Sometimes his grandson Cole came too, quieter each visit, as if the mountains were teaching him something he couldn't learn in school. Her children had visited, one by one. Michael had come in January, hiking in with hired gear and a guide, clearly terrified, but determined to see what had claimed his mother. He'd stayed 2 days, sleeping in a tent Rae set up near the cabin. By the time he left, he was quieter, more thoughtful. "I get it now," he'd said before hiking out. "Not completely, but I understand why you're here. You seem more like yourself than you ever did in Spokane." Sarah had been next, in early February. She'd come prepared to argue, to convince Rae this was all a mistake. Instead, she'd spent 3 days helping with chores, splitting wood, carrying water from the creek. On the last evening, sitting by the fire, she'd said, "I always thought you gave up everything for us. Maybe you did. I'm glad you took something back for yourself." James hadn't visited yet, but he called monthly now. Real calls, not the dutiful check-ins of before. He asked about her life with genuine interest. His daughters wanted to visit in summer to see where Grandma lived. The idea made Rae smile. Her siblings had mostly written her off. Linda sent occasional texts, terse, disapproving, but at least she was reaching out. Robert had gone silent after signing over his claim. Rae had made peace with that. Some people couldn't understand choosing freedom over security. She didn't need them to. The property was legally hers now. Jessica had completed all the paperwork. Rae's name was on the deed, with the same conservation restrictions that had protected the land since Thomas bought it in the 1930s. No development, no subdivision, no commercialization, just wilderness, held in trust for future generations. Rae had written her own will, carefully prepared with Jessica's help. The cabin and land would pass to whichever of her children or grandchildren chose to claim it, with the same provision her father had used. Whoever came to live here, whoever understood what it meant, would inherit. The cycle would continue. On this particular evening, with snow falling softly outside and the fire crackling, Rae felt a peace so profound it almost hurt. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, empty, purposeless, going through motions. That Rae seemed like a stranger now. She stood and walked to the door, stepping out onto the porch despite the cold. The forest was silent under its blanket of snow. The creek, partially frozen, made soft sounds beneath the ice. Stars blazed overhead, uncountable and eternal. "Thank you," Rae said aloud, to Estelle, to Thomas, to her father, to the mountains themselves. "Thank you for showing me the way home." No voice answered, but Rae felt a response, in the whisper of wind through the pines, in the weight of the stars, in the solid presence of the cabin at her back. This was right. This was where she belonged. She went back inside and returned to her journal. On a fresh page, she wrote, "My name is Rae Dunning. I'm 62 years old. 6 months ago, I discovered this cabin and claimed it as my own. It was not out of nostalgia. It was not out of desperation. It was a choice, the first completely free choice I'd made in decades. I came here following a map left by my father, seeking answers about my grandmother. What I found was myself. This cabin is my sanctuary now, as it was hers. I will protect it. I will honor it. And when my time comes, I will pass it to someone who understands what it means to choose freedom over comfort, truth over convention, wilderness over civilization. Some homes choose their keepers. This one chose me." She set down her pen and closed the journal. Tomorrow would bring more work. There was always work in the mountains. But tonight was for rest, for gratitude, for the simple pleasure of being warm and safe and exactly where she was supposed to be. Outside, the snow continued falling. Inside, the fire burned steady. And in the space between, Rae Dunning, keeper of the sanctuary, granddaughter of ghosts, inheritor of wildness, was finally, completely free. The cabin stood in its clearing, weathered but enduring. Above the door, carved into ancient wood, two names now marked its history: E. Dunning, 1926, and beside it, freshly carved in clean letters, Rae Dunning, 2024. Two women, separated by nearly a century, united by the same fierce determination to live life on their own terms. Two keepers of the same sanctuary. Two voices in an ongoing conversation between past and future, between constraint and freedom, between the world's expectations and the soul's true calling. The story didn't end here. Stories like this never truly end. They simply wait, patient as mountains, for the next person who needs them, for the next soul who hears the call of wild places and chooses to answer, for the next keeper who understands that some sanctuaries must be protected not just from development, but from forgetting. This is the story of how Rae Dunning found her way home. But more than that, it's the story of how home, true home, is not a place you're born into, but a place you choose. A place that calls to something deep within you and says, this is where you belong. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that place has been waiting for you all along.